from the company. He walked towards us, his calfskin shoes making crisp sounds on the hallway floor. Shortly after, Arlo came up to them and extended his hand, his voice lazy with a hint of contempt. Why are you staying properly at home? What are you doing here? Guessing he probably hadn't had time to go home for several days in a row, having been by someone else's side. I couldn't help but feel a wave of weariness. Not wanting to show a black face in front of others, I could only turn to leave. Arlo saw me leave and followed. We walked towards the ward together, neither of us speaking. Ever since I wanted a divorce, I no longer carefully tried to please him and make him happy like before. Near the ward door, Arlo suddenly grabbed my hand, trapping me between himself and the wall. His gaze was complex, his voice hoarse. What did you talk about with him? I wanted to break free, but Arlo used a bit more force and I was pressed back again. Arlo, this is a hospital. I know, of course. Arlo didn't budge. He pressed his body tightly against mine. His face was also pressed close to my ear, his voice carrying a hint of danger. I guessed his hidden thoughts. As the CEO of Brown Group with status and position, he wouldn't allow his wife to be too close to other men. I smiled bitterly. Arlo, I don't have your filthy thoughts. I don't have that mood either. Rest assured, before we divorce, I won't get involved with anyone else. After saying that, I pushed him away and turned to enter the ward. Arlo followed, pushing open the door. As soon as he entered, he frowned. It's actually not even a private room. My stepmother brought over a chair, speaking softly. Sit down quickly. I'll have Grona cut some fruit for you. For the sake of my dad's health, I could only reluctantly serve Arlo. Arlo sat down to chat with my dad. He was usually cold to me, but performed flawlessly in front of Dad. Dad had always liked him. But when Arlo suggested changing hospital, he still refused, smiling at Arlo. Let's not move around. It's fine here. That Dr. Harrison is very responsible. Arlo grasped the right degree and didn't insist. It's good if Dad is used to it here. After some small talk, when I handed him the cut apple, he didn't take it but instead stood up and said to my dad, well then, I'll take Grona home first. Dad, take care of yourself. Dad nodded. Arlo took me downstairs. The setting sun dyed the luxury car a blazing red, dazzling and noble. I was pushed into the car by Arlo. I wanted to get out, but my wrist was pressed down. Arlo's expression was composed. From outside the car, one absolutely couldn't tell he was using such force. I couldn't move at all, showing the clear difference in strength between men and women. When I gave up struggling, Arlo finally let go and quietly started smoking in the car. My breathing was slightly ragged as I looked at his profile. The dim light cast a shadow on his profile. Arlo was born with good looks and with his status. He could easily make women's hearts flutter. I vaguely recalled back then, it was just such a face that made me lose my mind. After a while, he put out the cigarette and took out a velvet box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a diamond ring. My throat tightened. This was the wedding ring I had sold that night. Arlo had bought it back. Arlo stared at my face the whole time, not missing any subtle changes in my expression, as if he wanted to see through my skin and flesh. After a long time, he spoke flatly. Hold out your hand. Put on the ring, then come home with me. I'll pretend that previous things never happened. You're still Mrs. Brown. He was rarely so generous and gracious, but I refused. I curled my palm, this direct action expressing my rejection. Arlo's patience was limited. What do you really want? I answered in a low voice. Divorce. I want to divorce you. As soon as the words fell, silence pervaded the car. For a long time, Arlo fastened his seatbelt and glanced sideways at me. I turned my face away, not giving him a single look. Arlo stared for a while, then lightly stepped on the gas. The car drove smoothly, the lights on both sides slowly receding. He clearly wanted to chat about something, but I didn't engage at all. About 5 minutes later, Arlo spoke. Tomorrow I'll arrange for your father to be transferred to Brown Hospital. He'll have the best team of experts treating him. And in the future, just tell me if you need money. His tone was quite gentle, considered a concession. He didn't love me and still cared about how I had schemed him back then. But he didn't intend to change wives. This would cause trouble for his life and the company's stock. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but smile self-mockingly. Arlo looked over puzzled but didn't care. He continued while holding the steering wheel. From now on, Secretary Quinn won't come to the house anymore. You can keep those jewels yourself. I'll instruct him. I listened quietly. The air conditioning in the car was very strong. I hugged myself to avoid shivering from the cold. I had been married to Arlo for 5 years and understood his personality quite well. To be honest, these concessions were considered favors from him. I should have been grateful and moved to tears. But I wasn't. He said quite a lot and made concessions. But he didn't mention Maeve at all, which meant if I accepted his arrangements, Maeve would still appear in our lives in the future with no changes. I was tired. I didn't want to be trapped in a marriage I loved anymore. I flatly refused. No need. My dad's current doctor is fine. Arlo heard my meaning. I didn't accept his goodwill and insisted on divorce. He couldn't help but get angry too. Grona, don't forget, we signed an agreement when we got married. If we divorce, you won't get a penny. I know. I answered quickly. Arlo's patience was exhausted. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, one hand on the steering wheel, the other rubbing his brow, his face showing impatience. How long are you going to make a fuss? Even now, he only thought I was making a fuss. My heart turned cold as I sat up straight, looking ahead. After a while, I said softly, Arlo, I'm serious. I don't want to be with you anymore. I stared straight into his dark, shining eyes, not giving an inch. He was handsome with well-defined features. I used to be quite infatuated with his face, but now I felt nothing. Nothing at all. For the first time, I saw an unhappy expression appear on Arlo's face. Before I could marvel at it, his phone rang. It was Secretary Quinn calling. Arlo answered, his tone not very good. What is it? On the other end of the phone, Secretary Quinn dutifully informed him. Miss Maeve just fell when getting out of bed. She's in a very bad mood now, Mr. Brown. Do you want to go see her? If you go, she'd definitely be very happy. Arlo held the phone without the strength to speak, clearly considering me beside him. His phone volume wasn't low. I heard it. I just found it funny. Then I opened the car door and got out, leaving without looking back. A gust of cold wind blew over me, chilling me to the bone. I'm glad that when Arlo took out the wedding ring earlier, I didn't waver. Didn't have a change of heart. Didn't want to go back to that suffocating married life. After leaving, I blocked all his contact methods. This 10-year relationship, I thoroughly gave up any last shred of hope. In the flow of traffic, my back was ramrod straight, just like my determination to divorce. Since that night I left alone, Arlo hadn't come to bother me for a long time. While feeling relieved, I was also a bit worried. The divorce still hadn't been settled. As long as he didn't agree, I would always be Mrs. Brown. This identity that had always constrained me, I was really exhausted from playing it. After some thought, I still decided to take the initiative. I express mailed the divorce agreement I had signed to his company. Arlo did indeed respond very quickly. Someone pushed down the price of the house I was selling to the lowest point. I guessed it was his intentional instruction to do this deliberately, using this method to force me back to his side. I wouldn't be so conceited as to think he would feel pity for me. I knew all he needed was a Mrs. Brown who could be taken out in public, without affecting the group's image. Besides me, there was no better candidate for now, including a savior. Although my family had fallen on hard times, a starved camel was still bigger than a horse. But seeing the multi-million-dollar mansion my mom had bought for me become worthless in an instant, my heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. I gritted my teeth and still decided to sell the house. The $50 million mansion ended up selling for less than $10 million. My stepmother watched me press my fingerprint at that moment and said resentfully, "These black-hearted people. Krona, if you were by Arlo's side, how could you suffer this kind of bullying? Listen to Auntie's advice, just go back to Arlo's side." Okay? I didn't say anything. The fingerprint I pressed was my best answer. In the days that followed, I was busy dealing with various transfer procedures and things, inside and outside the home. The days passed bit by bit like this. 2 months later, late at night, I saw Arlo again downstairs from my rented apartment, the divorce agreement. I had express mailed over, hadn't had any movement until now. So seeing Arlo appear in this place, I was very surprised. Before I could open my mouth while standing still, I saw Arlo turn around. "Krona, let's talk." Hooked at him without saving a word. I didn't think there was anything to talk about now except the divorce. 2 months. I've finally seen my Mrs. Brown. You used to call to check on me if you didn't see me for even one day. How come now you're so... I interrupted him and spoke directly. "Arlo, I don't think we need to reminisce about the past." Arlo's eyes stared straight at me. After a while, he let out a cold laugh. "I've done the math for you. Given your dad's current condition, you need to spend at least $1 million every month. Add in those rough expenses for your family. You need at least $2 million per month to get by. And you have no source of income now. Your savings will only last a year at most." I expressionlessly said to him, "As long as Mr. Brown is merciful, I'll always find a way to get through difficulties." "Mr. Brown?" Arlo sneered. "Why didn't you call me Mr. Brown when you climbed into my bed back then? Now you want to leave. You think it's that easy?" Hearing his accusations, it was like the last bit of strength had been drained from me. I said, "I didn't deliberately climb into your bed. I've explained this too many times. I'm really tired, Arlo. Please let me go. I didn't ask for anything on the divorce agreement. You didn't lose anything in all these years. You can find someone new or be with your savior." Arlo looked at me with a mocking gaze and said meaningfully, "Oh, find someone new? You've made me second-hand goods. Where am I supposed to find a woman of equal status? Or have you already found your next partner, so you're in such a hurry?" His words were unpleasant. I didn't want to continue being insulted by his baseless accusations. I walked past him straight towards the house, but was pulled back as I was leaving. "Krona, come back and continue being Mrs. Brown. I can still treat you like before." I laughed from anger. The same as before? Be a mascot and decoration like before? This Mrs. Brown, I don't want to be it anymore at all. After saying that, I pried his fingers off one by one, then left without looking back. A gust of cold wind blew over me, chilling me to the bone. I thought. Fortunately, I didn't waver earlier when Arlo took out the wedding ring. Didn't have a change of heart. Didn't want to go back to that suffocating married life. This time, I had thoroughly fallen out with Arlo. I originally thought our ending would be a prolonged battle. I imagined many possibilities. Never imagined it would be this kind of decisive break to end my 10 years of feelings. I was prepared for a series of torments after angering Arlo. After all, he was a businessman who took revenge for the smallest grievances. But Arlo seemed to have changed his nature. The methods I imagined didn't appear. At first, all the gossip news about Arlo disappeared overnight. The villa I had sold at a low price was also compensated at double the original price by the buyer. Later, the hospital where my dad was staying stopped charging us for treatment fees. When I asked, they said someone had already paid for us. Not only that, my family's affairs were also settled. I sat in the conference room looking at the new contract, presented by the other party, feeling like I was in a dream. I was afraid one wrong step would lead to disaster. I couldn't grasp what Arlo's intentions were. How come he suddenly seemed like a different person? Was this a ploy to win me back with kindness? "I want to see Arlo," I said to the person who kept trying to curry favor with me. He looked very troubled. "Tell him it's me who wants to see him. He won't make things difficult for you," I slowly said to the man. I knew he would definitely be able to contact Arlo, since breaking things off with him. I no longer had his contact information, and didn't want to have too much entanglement. Going through someone else was undoubtedly the best way for me now. Hearing me say this, the man finally picked up the phone. Not long after, a luxury car came to pick me up. Stepping into Arlo's office again, everything from the past seemed like it had happened long ago. Arlo sat expressionlessly on the office sofa. On the coffee table in front of him was a divorce agreement that had already been signed. I was a bit surprised. How come he who had refused to let go before was now so meekly agreeing? I closed the door and walked over to sit on the sofa opposite him. I was about to pick up the agreement to look at it, but Arlo wouldn't let me look. "You can look at this later." Perhaps because we were divorcing, his tone was very gentle. I raised my eyes to look at him quietly. Arlo also gazed into my eyes silently for a long time before softly speaking. "I'm sorry." I saw the always arrogant Arlo, who never bowed his head, sincerely apologized to me. I was a bit scared by this sudden change, but after calming down and thinking carefully, I quickly understood why. He knew the truth about that year. After so many years, he finally was willing to seek out the truth. I pressed my lips tightly to not let my grievances burst out at this moment, but tears still fell drop by drop like broken strings of pearls. Seeing me like this, Arlo hurriedly stood up from the sofa and hugged me. I wanted to break free, but he kept tightening his arms. "Krona, I'm sorry. It was my stupidity that ruined your feelings. I just found out what I had done. I thought that night was your deliberate scheme. I had people investigate and only then found out the masterminds behind. The drunk mistake and me being awakened from illness were my mother's doing. I didn't know she would go to such lengths to find a daughter-in-law for the Brown family. It's our fault. Can you give me one more chance?" Seeing I had no reaction to this, he continued very sincerely. "I will make it up to you properly. You don't know how heartbroken I was when I found your diary on your dressing table. Everything was revealed. This should have been a scene I had longed for immensely. But now watching him explain with tears in his eyes, I felt like a bystander. How could I let it go? Because of one scheme, my 10 years of feelings became a joke. In this marriage, I lived without any self-esteem. There was a time when facing Arlo's accusations, I almost felt like I was the unforgivable sinner. How could it be resolved with just a light, give me another chance? I don't know how many tears fell before they finally seemed to dry up. I pushed away and spoke hoarsely. I don't need your compensation. If possible, please let me go. Arlo looked ashen and persisted. Rona, I want to know, why do we have to get divorced? You loved me for so many years. Now everything is clear. Isn't it good to be with me properly? I tilted my head back slightly, suppressing the tears that were about to well up again. He was describing a beautiful ending. If I was willing to surrender now, I would live even better than before. But what he didn't know was that in those years, he misunderstood me. Every single thing he did to hurt me was enough to be etched in my bones. After a while, I finally answered softly. It's time. Time has worn away my feelings for you. Time has made me disappointed in you again and again. Disappointed in our marriage. Arlo looked at me silently for a long time. So you don't love me anymore. Is that right? I lowered my eyes and said yes. His voice was hoarse beyond recognition. Fine. I let you go. He looked into the distance, his Adam's apple bobbing, and announced his decision. I will transfer 2 villas and 4 apartments to your name, as long as you don't remarry. I will pay you $80 million in alimony every year. But I spoke softly. Arlo, let's make a clean break. It's better for both of us. After I finished speaking, what I got was not an answer, but another embrace trying to keep me. That familiar body temperature made my eyes red. Arlo, let me go. We're already divorced. What are you doing now? His voice was even more suppressed. Rona, give me one more chance. He was almost trembling as he said this. He had probably used up all his pride to beg me. This should be the last time, right? But I heard my own voice, suppressed yet determined. Arlo, it's no use. We're over. Stop trying to win me back. I broke free from his embrace. Hurriedly gathered my things, including that signed divorce agreement, leaving this man who had trapped me for 10 years. We were finally over. Our marriage had finally come to an end. The moment I stepped out the door, I felt an unprecedented lightness in my heart, looking at the sunlight pouring down in the distance. My future must be bright and brilliant.